Tēnā tātou katoa, and welcome to this webinar on preparing for re-registration under the Incorporated Societies Act 2022. My name is Hayley, and I'm an engagement advisor in the Information and Education team here at MB. I will start with today's opening karakia. Tawhia tō mana kia mau, kia maia, ka huri taku aro, ki te pai ka hurangi, kei reira te oranga moku, ma mahi tahi ka ora ka puawai, a mātau mahi katoa, ka pono, ka tika, tihei Māori ora. I'll now hand over to our presenter, David Josland.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Before we start today's webinar, I'll introduce myself. My name's David Josland, and I'm a senior solicitor in the Companies Office, which is part of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. So what we're going to look at today are issues relating to the Incorporated Societies Act 2022 and importantly, the process around re-registering an existing society that's registered under the Incorporated Societies 1908, re-registering that under the new Incorporated Societies Act 2022. So we're going to look at things like deciding whether your society needs to re-register. So we'll look at some points that you might like to consider but when your society and its members are considering re-registration. We're going to look at some key requirements for your society's constitution in terms of ensuring that it complies with the 2022 Act. We're just going to very briefly mention the fact that societies under the new Act will need to file an annual financial statement and also an annual return. We're going to look at some other specific information about the re-registration process and what happens when your society is re-registered, and things to look out for in terms of making sure that your application to re-register and also your constitution is compliant with the 2022 Act. So we're going to put up some details now about our website. And specifically, we've got an Incorporated Societies Law Changes Hub on our society's website. The website address is on the screen now for you. So the things that I'm going to be discussing now are available on that Law Changes Hub website. I'd also like to point out that you can email us at engage@societies.govt.nz with any questions that you may have about what we're discussing today and any other questions about the 2022 Act itself. So what I'd just like to say before we go further is that the information that I'm going to be talking about is of a general nature. So there's a lot of information about the 2022 Act on our society's website. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. And there's also, as I said earlier, a specific section on re-registration. So our office cannot provide you or your society with legal advice. So you may wish to consider seeking professional advice in terms of the requirements of the 2022 Act and the registration process. But I'd also like to point out that the Act itself and the regulations are available on the legislation website at www.legislation.govt.nz. So you'll need to enter the name of the legislation, the Incorporated Societies Act 2022, and also the regulations, which are the Incorporated Societies Regulations 2023, into the website legislation website search engine to access that information. So to begin with, we want to just briefly mention about what the changes are all about. So obviously, existing incorporated societies in New Zealand have been governed by the Incorporated Societies Act 1908, and it's well over 100 years old. So the 2022 Act effectively modernises the law for incorporated societies and introduces and sets out some of the latest governance concepts. It formalises officer duties, provides more detailed guidance on the holding of meetings and what must be presented at meetings of societies, and also how societies should keep records. It sets out the financial reporting requirements of societies in more detail, and also requires societies to have compulsory dispute resolution processes set out in their constitutions. The Act also allows one or more societies to amalgamate. It also has new processes for removing and restoring incorporated societies. So at this stage, it's important to remember that no new societies can be incorporated under the Incorporated Societies 1908. All new societies an application must be made under the 2022 Act. The re-registration process that I'm going to talk about in more detail allows existing 1908 Act societies to re-register and become societies under the 2022 Act. So existing at the moment, we're in a period of what we call transition, where existing 1908 Act societies will operate under the 1908 Act until they apply and become re-registered under the 2022 Act. So they'll continue to operate under the 1908 Act and the 1908 Act rules until an application is made to re-register and the society is re-registered under the 2022 Act. So that's an important thing to remember. There'll be some societies that have now new societies that have registered under the 2022 Act and are now considered to be 2022 Act societies going forward. But 1908 Act societies now are in a period of approximately 2.5 years to re-register from the 1908 Act to the 2022 Act. Now, re-registration takes place online on the Society's website, the address of which is on the presentation slide. Now, this re-registration process is set out in Schedule 1 of the 2022 Act. So if you're using the legislation website, make sure you scroll down to the bottom of the Act and you'll see the heading Schedule 1. And it's the title of that schedule is Transitional Savings and Related Provisions. So the clauses in this section are sequential. They flow in obviously an order in which a society needs to prepare itself to re-register. And essentially it sets out the steps that an existing 1908 Act society needs to take to re-register successfully under the 2022 Act. As I said earlier, it's important to remember that an existing 1908 Act society is subject to the 1908 Act and its 1908 Act rules until it re-registers. And what we're going to talk about a little later in the presentation is this re-registration process that the schedule, the transitional provisions permit the movement of a society to the 2022 Act through the amendment of its existing constitution or through the development of a completely new constitution, both of which must comply with the 2022 Act. But we're going to talk about this in more detail shortly. So one of the first things that your society and its members need to decide is if your existing 1908 Act society is in fact going to re-register under the 2022 Act. And if it chooses to do this, your members and the society need to prepare documentation that complies with the 2022 Act so that you can make a successful application to re-register. So what should your society do? So first of all, your members and the society need to consider the implications of re-registering and the consequences of not re-registering. And I'm just going to talk briefly about some of these now. Most likely, your society and its members will do this in the context of probably a general meeting following your existing rules for your 1908 Act society. You'll also need to consider what changes need to be made to your existing 1908 Act set of rules, or whether your society wants to develop and submit a new constitution that complies with the 2022 Act. There are some consequences if a 1908 Act society does not re-register under the 2022 Act. So at the moment, we're in a re-registration transitional period that provides for approximately 2.5 years for your existing society to re-register under the new Act. Now, if your society does not re-register by the 5th of April 2026, it will cease to exist and the registrar will remove it from the register. What you may wish to consider then is if your society decides that re-registration is not an option, the members may wish to consider winding it up now under its 1908 Act rules and also under the 1908 Act provisions. This means that either a liquidator may have to be appointed or the society is wound up in accordance with its rules, and then the application is made to the registrar to have the society dissolved under the 1908 Act. This will involve dealing with the society's surplus assets and any liabilities that it may have during the winding up process. Some of the consequences of either winding up the society and having it dissolved, or of not re-registering and the society ceasing to exist with the registrar removing it at the end of the re-registration period, is that the society will lose its body corporate status. And further, the society will lose the protection the limited protection that registration under the 1908 Act provides to the society. So another society may apply to be registered under the 2022 Act and utilizes the name or a very similar name to the name of your former society. Because of the loss of body corporate status, any existing contracts that the society may have with third parties will likely be affected. So you'd need to consider that factor as well. There are other factors that could arise, and if you're at all in doubt about what may happen, I'd recommend that you seek professional advice specific to your society. So if your society decides to re-register under the 2022 Act, it'll need to adopt some new processes in its constitution. So one, it can either update its existing or amend its existing 1908 Act constitution under the provisions of the 1908 Act, or you can adopt a completely new constitution that complies with the 2022 Act. So you can look at whether you need to make small changes to incorporate what Section 26 of the Incorporated Societies Act 2022 provides, or possibly you could look at redrafting or drafting a completely new constitution that complies with Section 26 of the Act. So I'd strongly advise you to look at the requirements of Section 26 on the legislation site, and also the information about constitutions that are contained in our Law Changes Hub on the Society's website. What I'd like to do now is just briefly clarify or make sure that you understand the two types of ways that a society can handle its constitutional document during the re-registration process. I've already touched on it, but I just want to make it clearer to you so that you understand the two different options that are available. So fundamentally, the re-registration or the transitional provisions of the 2022 Act are designed to make it easier for your society to re-register and to give it some flexibility in terms of how it handles or how a successful application to re-register a society is made. So it gives you, the society, 2.5 years to go through this process. And also it sets out different procedures that the society can undertake, specifically in relation to adopting a new constitution that complies with the 2022 Act and combines it with your application for re-registration. So I'm just going to talk briefly about this now. If you were to look at Schedule 1 and the transitional provisions of the Act, you'll notice that there are two clauses in that schedule, clauses 8 and 9. Now, specifically, these clauses allow an existing 1908 Act society to amend its rules to facilitate re-registration. And that allows a society that is under the 1908 Act currently to amend its existing rules, which the 1908 Act refers to, rules, to make them comply with the 2022 Act. So you can provide that document with your application for re-registration. Now, Clause 10 in the schedule says that an existing 1908 Act society may approve a new constitution to take effect on re-registration. So this means that an existing 1908 Act society can develop a new constitution completely and then provide that with your application to re-register, and that new constitution takes effect on re-registration. So they're the two different types of processes that your society can follow to update its rules or develop a constitution to comply with the 2022 Act Section 26 requirements. Now, I'm just going to talk generally about what the Constitution must contain, and it contains a lot of additional things that are different to what your 1908 Act society rules may contain. So the first thing is that they must provide for the election or appointment of a contact person. You can have up to 3 contact people. You provide their names and contact details as part of the application to re-register. Now, the name and contact details of this contact person or people are retained by the registrar. They are not made available to the public or put on the public register. They are held by the registrar so that he can contact societies when necessary. So it's really just ensuring that there's somebody within your society that is available when the registrar may need to contact your society. a major change with the 2022 Act is the requirement that your constitution have provisions for dispute resolution. Now, a society is free to develop its own dispute resolution procedures. However, the Act provides for a model set of dispute resolution procedures that your society can adopt and integrate into its constitution. That is set out in the schedule to the Act, the dispute resolution procedures. Another fundamental change is this concept of consent. So how people consent to become members of societies. So the Act infers that the consent should be an express consent, and ideally in writing. So you may wish to develop this or integrate the consent process into your society's membership application. We don't need a copy of the member's consent. It's to be maintained with the society's membership records. And the Act also sets out the keeping by societies of a membership register. And the Act specifies that this must be maintained at all times by society. So recording when people join, when people cease to be members, changes in members' contact details, etc. There's also the concept of officer consent. And so this is around or linked into the officer duties that the Act brings into force. But this concept of officers needing to consent to become officers, and also they need to certify that they're not disqualified from holding office as an officer. So the Act sets out disqualification criteria, and an incoming officer must certify that they are not disqualified from being an officer. These consents and the certification should be kept with the society's own records. There's also new requirements around maintaining an interests register, so that needs to be kept up to date in terms of when officers may have interests in matters that the society is involved in, and they need to disclose those to a committee or to the committee. The Act sets out quite comprehensively new financial reporting standards and requirements, and also the requirement that societies provide the registrar with an annual return. And we've designed our website so that those documents can be provided at the same time by societies. And it's important to remember, though, that if your society is registered as a charity with charity services, the Act actually says that you don't need to file the financial statement and the annual return with our office. The documents will only need to be provided with charity services. Another thing that the Act brings into effect is the rules around the disposal of surplus assets. And so when you look at the requirements here, which are set out on our website, but also in the Act itself, is this requirement for societies to nominate in their constitution another not-for-profit organisation that surplus assets can be left to or need to be left to, or a class of not-for-profit organisations that the surplus assets are left to. As I said earlier, the financial statements and annual return, they can be filed together, but they must be filed all within 6 months of your society's balance date, which is the taken to be the end of the financial year. And as I said earlier, these can be filed together online on our website. There's some other important things that your society needs to consider when making an application. And in fact, information that your society needs to provide as part of the application process. So first of all, you need to confirm that the society has a minimum of 10 members. We don't need their names or address details. We just need you to certify that the society has 10 or more members. You also need a committee that has a minimum of 3 people, and they will be officers of the society. The other thing to remember is this concept of contact person. And so that needs to be set out in the Constitution document in terms of how a contact person might be elected or appointed. So these are some factors that you need to consider and think about when you're making a decision, or when your members are deciding on whether to re-register your 1908 Act incorporated society. So these things might be talked about in the context of your existing society's general meeting, which obviously the rules of your society will set out how and when such a meeting can be held. Now, the re-registration process is an online process, and to re-register your society, you're going to need to provide us with the proposed name of the society, which most likely will be the existing name of your 1908 Act society. Your society's amended rules or new constitution or constitutional document needs to comply with the requirements of Section 26 of the Act. Remember to provide details of the contact person or persons. You can have up to 3. And the details of the contact person or people will not be made available to the public. We need to have the names and addresses of each officer, although the officer addresses will not be made available on the public register. They will be held internally by the registrar. You'll need to confirm that those officers have consented to be officers and have also certified that they're not disqualified from being appointed or elected as officers. You need to provide us with your society's registered office address, and also confirm that the society has a minimum of 10 members. Now, there's no fee to re-register under the 2022 Act, although there is a registration fee for new societies that register under the 2022 Act. Things to watch out for in terms of making an application and preparing your constitution. I'm going to stress it again. Please make sure that your constitution contains the requirements set out in Section 26 of the 2022 Act. And remember to make reference in that constitution to the appointment or election of the contact person or people. Also, remember to include, critically, dispute resolution procedures that your society can utilize on an ongoing basis under the new Act. Another thing to remember is to refer to concepts that are contained in the 2022 Act. So, for instance, don't refer to pecuniary gain, because that's a concept that your existing 1908 Act society will have provisions in its rules to prevent. And also the 1908 Act has sections around pecuniary gain. Well, the 2022 Act talks about the concept of financial gain. So that's the term that you should be using in your constitution. Another thing to remember is you don't need to apply. So if you've got an existing 1908 Act society, you should not make an application to register a completely new 2022 Act society. The re-registration transitional provisions have been put in place to allow or facilitate your 1908 Act society to re-register under the 2022 Act. So it's not a case of your existing 1908 Act society making a new application to register as a 2022 Act society. You should use the re-registration process to re-register your existing society. Make sure that the name of your society is consistently written in your application for re-registration and also your constitution. So in particular, it could just be little things like if you referred in your constitution to the word incorporated in full, make sure that you use the full word incorporated in your application. And alternatively, if you just use the abbreviation INC, INC, in your constitution, make sure you use that in your application, because we will issue you with your certificate of re-registration or incorporation with the name that you specify in your documents. And so we want you to be consistent with the naming conventions for your society so that we can issue the certificate in the correct full name. Also, make sure that you specify the winding up provisions, or in the winding up provisions, the disposal of surplus assets that you can either nominate a not-for-profit organization or a class of not-for-profit organizations. We've noticed recently that some applications, the constitutions refer to giving the surplus assets back to the society, which is not permitted. Once your society has been re-registered, we will issue a certificate of incorporation for your society that will include details of the re-registration date for your society. There are a couple of grounds where the registrar can refuse to register an application. So just make sure that you don't fall into this category. So for instance, the registrar can refuse to register or re-register a society if its name does not comply with the requirements of Section 11 of the Incorporated Societies Act. So this is where a name might contravene legislation or is identical or almost identical to the name of another society or a body corporate, or the reserved name of a company, or is likely to mislead the public, or is offensive, or does not include the words incorporated in full, or Inc., or mana taupu. The purposes must also, or cannot be unlawful. The purposes set out in your constitution cannot be unlawful, and also the purposes cannot be for the financial gain of members. And an application will be refused if the constitution does not comply with the requirements of Section 26 of the Act. I just want to also point out before we finish that in addition to the resources on the Law Changes Hub, we have a revised constitution builder, which is designed and set up to include the requirements of Section 26 of the Incorporated Societies Act 2022. So that constitution builder is available through the Law Changes Hub on the Society's website, and it's geared now for you to utilize to prepare a constitution that complies with Section 26 of the Act. So if you have any questions about the information in this webinar, feel free to email us at engage@societies.govt.nz. Now, also, if you are unsure about any of the processes that are required for re-registration, it may be appropriate for you and your society to seek professional advice around what the 2022 Act requires, and also around the drafting of your constitution to ensure that it does comply with Section 26. Also around whether your society and its members want to re-register your society, and in terms of what the consequences of not re-registering may be. You may also wish to seek professional advice around those issues as well. So this brings us now to the end of the webinar, and I'd like to thank you very much for watching it. I'm now going to hand you over to Hayley, who's going to do our MB closing karakia.
Thank you, David. Here is MB's closing karakia. Ka hiki te tapu kia waitea ai te ara, kia turuki ai te ao marama, hui e taiki e.